This episode of Off Sunday features themes that may be triggering for some individuals, including topics of physical and emotional abuse. Please take care of yourself and don't hesitate to reach out or ask for help. God is perfect. People are messy. Even though churches are built to be sanctuaries, we can't ignore that they are made of humans. We are mortal, flawed, and bring our own set of trauma to every equation, whether we realize it or not. Still, even fully accepting our human selves, when we are hurt by church, it's a poisonous pain. How could an institution built on love, meant to protect you and connect you with a kind community, hurt you like this? And what happens next? How can you trust again? Who can you talk to? Is restoration possible? As that pain seeps in, it can start to steer the course of your faith journey, tipping you into the shadows, harmed and afraid. But there is hope, because it doesn't have to be this way. Church hurt happens and will happen. And today, we're going to dive deep into what that means and what we can do as individuals and as a church to make every opportunity for people to not stay in suffering. Hi, and welcome to Off Sunday, our podcast series that goes beyond our Sunday message and covers topics of today to help make faith relatable and applicable to daily life. Because spoiler alert, it is. I'm your host and New Life's creative director, Heather Vestal. Today, we are talking about church hurt. That's pain that's a result of actions taken by churches, church leaders, and church-goers alike inside the confines of the church community. Joining me today is our lead pastor, Joe Wickman.
Hey, everybody. I'm so glad we're doing this. As a church hurt survivor, I'm really looking forward to what I'm going to learn today as we talk amongst ourselves. And I know that because I've gone to church pretty much my whole life, I have been a part of church hurt for other people. And as a pastor who really cares about a flock, about a congregation, I'm so happy we're going to have a conversation that can be both healing and helpful to those who have been hurt.
Well, thanks, Joe. And also joining us today is our community pastor, Marisa Schweiger.
Hi, I'm glad to be here, and I'm really glad that we're able to have this conversation. I know I've been in church most of my life and been a part of church hurt for others, and I grieve that, and also have experienced hurt myself. So I know how important this conversation is, and I'm glad that we're able to bring it out and just talk through it.
Well, thank you for being here, Marisa. And this is a very layered issue. Like you said, you've been part of it in more than one way. And that kind of brings me to my first question about church hurt is who can be affected by church hurt? Who can be responsible? Because I think that you, as somebody that's worked with our small groups and everything, you see this on a different scale than I might see it in my position.
When you think about it, the minute I walk into a church, the church is imperfect. We're all imperfect people. And when we get together in any group or space, we tend to bring our own baggage, our own things, and we bump up against each other, and things do get messy. I've seen it over and over again. I've experienced it. And even people with the best of intentions can end up hurting each other, and even maybe not realize it. I think that's one of the hard things about church hurt is people are well-meaning. We want to help others. We want to be there, but two people can be in the same experience and come away. One person can be hurt and the other person has no idea that they hurt them. It's a really strange dynamic that happens, and I think it's a way, because God created us for community and connection with others, I think Satan wants to get in and divide, and I've seen it over and over and over again through relationships with other people. And it's sad, but it's not unsolvable. God has hope and healing that can happen, but that's part of relationship, is working through to the other side.
Yeah. I think what's important to talk about with church hurt, and I mentioned it in our intro, is that it's a poisonous pain. Obviously, the victim is affected by this, but it goes beyond the victim. First of all, their family and friends, people around them are going to be affected. But I know that it goes beyond that. It goes into other churchgoers who see it and are like, hey, that's not okay. Um, and then it goes into the community. I grew up not being part of a church community. And as someone that didn't go to a church, I knew about people that had been affected by a church. And yeah, it affected me too. And the church itself, for that reason, also gets hurt because, we're allowing these things to happen without
Yeah.
being addressed.
Because if you don't address it, that speaks volumes to anybody who's watching.
And I think the poisonous part of church hurt and what makes it such a volatile issue to talk about and such a painful thing to experience is that there's a nature of it, in my mind, being a double hurtful, because not only, you said it in the intro, the church, by God's design, is a place of refuge, it's a place of healing, it's a place of hope. And when that place that you're supposed to be safe, your refuge, turns into a dangerous place, and instead of healing, you're harmed, and instead of hope, you are dismayed, then it's as though you have the function of hurt coming from any other source that's supposed to be life-giving. If just a random stranger, punched me in the nose, it would be one thing. But if it was somebody that I had cared deeply about and trusted to a great degree, it would be much more damaging.
I think of an analogy would be a child with an abusive parent. They want to go to that parent for comfort and for love, but then that person is also a figure of fear and pain in their life. And that just causes so much internal trauma for people. And I'm like, I think that's an appropriate way to describe what church hurt can become for people if it's not talked about, if it's not addressed, if it just sits and festers. I realize it might be helpful if we just kind of give some concrete examples of what church hurt might look like, just in case someone's really not familiar with that term or what that term encompasses.
I think one thing that comes to mind for me is from a small group context. If you join a small group and you're sharing, small group is meant to be a safe place where you open up with a small group of people, and but what has happened and is somebody's confidence is broken. What they've shared in group was shared outside of the group. And that can be really hurtful because you trusted a person to keep your confidence and you shared something that is close to your heart and you open up, then you hear about it from someone else. That's church hurt. That's extremely hurtful because small groups are designed to be a safe place where people can pour out what's the deepest things that they're struggling with or walk with other people in their life journey. And when your confidence is broken, that can really, rock your trust in others.
And I think all of us who have been in church work for some time have inevitably grieved the loss of somebody who was part of our church family. And when something like that happened, they couldn't maintain fellowship, and they either went to another church, which is less heartbreaking than them just stopping going to church altogether, which unfortunately there's millions of people in this world who have just opted out. And I understand, but I don't want anybody to stay there, which is, I think, the heart behind why we're doing this episode.
Yeah. I know people that have legitimate reasons to have bad taste in their mouths because of church experiences. And that's heartbreaking to see. And that's where I'm like, what can I do? How can I help these people?
Well, and there's a scale. You take that example that Marisa said about somebody's trust being broken because folks that they had confided in didn't keep that private. Absolutely true. And on kind of the broader end of it, that's very personal. We have too many stories in the church throughout history and, in modern day. Let's say there's a financial scandal and you're sitting there and the whole congregation is like, wait a minute. We've been giving generously and faithfully and even sacrificing, and it turns out the money was misused. Boom, that's huge. And then the other big one, if a leader were to just be in not just like some incidental thing, but in huge sin, committing crimes, abusing people, sex outside of their marriage. Those things, are devastating not only to individuals but to whole communities of faith, and they leave a ripple, sort of, so to speak, like a big ripple in the pond, but that just kind of keeps reverberating.
So we know what church hurt is now, and thank you for coming up with those examples. They certainly don't encompass everything, but I think they help paint that picture. We know how far it can reach. It ripples out onward, beyond our sight, really. And now what? Church hurt happens, and like we addressed earlier, it will happen because people are messy. And like you said, as soon as you walk into a church, the church is imperfect. So now what? It's happened. How do we take steps to move forward? Because God promises that we don't have to stay in suffering.
The God of resurrection absolutely makes different and hopeful and healing possible. And the truth we have to jump into first is that time does not heal all wounds. You may have heard that. It's just not true. Sometimes time lets wounds fester and become infected, and that infection affects the whole body. And so only intentionality will bring healing. So for those who are hurting, pretending church hurt hasn't happened to you is not a valid response. There's time to overlook an offense, and sometimes that's the right thing to do. If somebody kind of brushes up against me or pokes me in the eye, and there's many times it's a biblical thing to overlook an offense, and there's a time to confront as well. And sometimes non-response is just going to let the thing continue unchecked. And so non-response, you have to be very wise about this, because non-response is a response.
Yeah, it's so true, because if, a lot of times we'll hear, well, I didn't see that, or I didn't do anything about that, but what happens is that invalidates what happened. It tries to make it less, and people will walk away more hurt because they feel unheard or unseen. And that speaks volumes to people who are hurting.
Yeah. Humans communicate in more ways than just words, and it's so easy to make assumptions. And so it's like, just try to avoid doing any of that. Try to just bring it to somebody, because pretending like it didn't happen, you'll make up your own story in your head, whether you realize it or not. And it's dangerous to ourselves. It hurts.
It's completely legitimate to say, hey, that wasn't right. That hurt me, or you hurt me, and you need to make this right. Sometimes, unless you confront something directly, it's just not going to get dealt with. And on the other side of the coin, if you are the source of church hurt, you need to square up with that reality and, say, I'm sorry, forgive me, but don't stop there. Because saying I'm sorry, please forgive me, and then turning around and not changing the habit or the attitude that contributed to that hurt happening, it's just going to keep on going.
Yeah. I think the first I'm sorry is really when you confess to God, and begin that, that's the first little domino to tip over in that process of seeking forgiveness from somebody, is being able to say that out loud to our Father. and ask for his forgiveness.
I think that's the line where being imperfect people isn't an excuse. We have to have the humility to accept that we have a part and that we affect each other in the body, and be willing to address those things. And like Heather said, talk to God first, but then go to the person and truly be repentant. That's how healing starts.
Yeah, and I like that the concept of that these conversations are healing conversations, because I'm an avoidant person, so in my head, like the thought of taking something to someone, all of the worst case scenarios are going to play out in my head, and it's really like I need to remember that God uses everything, even conflict, to grow people. I mean, especially conflict.
Read the Bible.
Sometimes he uses conflict here and there. Yeah, so.
And I was thinking about Peter, because Peter was this incredibly bold leader, and there were times when Peter had incredible patience and overlooked offenses. And you're like, wow, this guy really learned some new tricks by following Jesus. This was not his personality at all. And then, in Acts 5, Ananias and Sapphira come in front of him, and he's like, yo, you lied to God. Boom, church discipline, like in the most extreme sense, happened. And so we have guidance in Scripture for us to have healing conversations. And I think, if anybody is listening who is in any position of leadership, whether it's that small group leader, the leader of children, whether it's somebody who's, on a ministry team, or even pastors, pretending church hurt doesn't happen in your church is just not a valid response. So we've got to be honest and deal with reality. Reality is our friend. Facts are our friends. And so, Heather, I think in the same way that you just described this avoidant tendency to like that's going to be really uncomfortable. I think leaders can err in that direction as well, and they can say like, oh, like, well, I don't want to upset everybody. Maybe this will just go away. Maybe it will, and maybe the church's peace will go away, and maybe the people who are hurt will go away, and maybe your credibility will go away. If you wait long enough, anything will go away. And the kingdom coming in increasing degree in your church can go away.
I think that I used to be very avoidant. I still have that tendency, but the thing that I found is I have to fight for the good that I know is on the other side. And every time we talk about this a lot in Celebrate Recovery, we talk about James 5:16, and we talk about how it says, if you confess your sins to each other and pray for each other, then you will be healed. Yes. And healing comes from that open conversation. God designed it that way because we have.
It sounds scary.
It does. It can be, but it's like a muscle that you work on, because for your entire life, all of us will have conflict in some way, because like we talked about, being humans on earth, we have things we need to work through and work on, and God gave us each other to do it.
So I think it's time that we really take our deep dive into what a healing conversation is. We're trying to make a commitment here at New Life to create space for healing conversations, and it's something that we really believe all churches should be trying to do. All places that have a structure of any sort of leadership should be trying to create spaces for healing conversations, and that's an intentional work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And before we can have a healing conversation, we need to be intentional about creating a space for healing conversations. Although this is something that we're doing here at New Life, we really feel this can apply to people in any church. But in order for this process to work, your church leaders need to be open to talk to. And that brings me to our first question is, who can you talk to when you've experienced or witnessed church hurt? And this doesn't mean specifically here at New Life, but for people in any church, in any situation, who can you talk to?
Yeah, I think this is really important to level set for folks who may have had different church experiences growing up and currently. The job of a leader is to create that space. And as the individual, though, if you've experienced church hurt, just common sense tells you that if there's something wrong, you should be able to talk to the people in charge. But maybe this could be like a litmus test for whether or not your church is open to having healing conversations. I hope you can talk to your lead pastor. And, but hey, as a leader, I understand that sometimes hearing difficult things can be hard because you're like, okay, this is not fun. If there's other pastors or staff, I hope that they are receptive to hearing and helping in the healing process. If that's not successful, maybe there are board members who can be sought out. Maybe you've got somebody who's your small group leader or, just leading a volunteer team. If you've been hurt in the church, I think it's totally appropriate to go to a leader and say, "Hey, can you help me with this?" And one layer that I would add also is that in certain cases, it's appropriate to go outside of the local church to whatever sort of structure that church is a part of. If it's an independent church, that might be harder, but our church is part of a denomination. I have somebody I answer to and a superintendent and different folks, and it might feel like, oh gosh, I'm tattling. But if there's an issue that's not, they're not willing to address, sometimes you just have to go through the process to get that addressed.
And sometimes it's a matter of, who's directly involved with this. So if you're serving on a volunteer team and something happens on that team, you should be able to talk to your volunteer leader.
Yeah.
Now, there's a chance that you're still not feeling heard. Maybe the leader isn't equipped. They aren't resourced enough to know how to help you. So you branch up. Is there a staff member that you can reach out to? Is there another pastor? And keep working your way until you're able to find someone who's able to sit down and listen with you and actually work through this. Because it's not always that someone doesn't want to, it's that someone might not know how, which is why we're trying to
For
have
sure.
this
I
today.
just had this
Trying to
image in
teach
my
people.
head, like if I was like, oh, there's a fire in that trash can over there in the corner, and I went to somebody and they were like, yeah, I don't care. And then I went to somebody else. I would keep on going to somebody until I found somebody who knew where the fire extinguisher was. And because this is a difficult process for anybody who's been hurt, first, you're hurt, and now you feel vulnerable because you're kind of reliving this pain by trying to seek, seek out help. And if you're not finding help, we don't want anybody to be in that position. So a step that we've taken that here at New Life that I'm really pleased about is that because we know it's difficult for folks to come to me sometimes, and I think I'm friendly. I think I'm open. I think our whole staff is approachable. We have put our board members on our website and so on and so forth. But I know some people who have been hurt don't want to go to somebody who's in authority because it feels scary. Maybe they got bad experiences with people mistreating them. Maybe the problem is with me, or maybe the problem is with our structure. So what we've done at New Life is we found two people who we are approaching, presenting to our congregation in just another few days here, who are called designated reporter. These are people who are not on staff. They're not on our board. They're professional counselors who are trained and able to handle confidential reporting. And what we're doing is trying to say, listen, we want to provide an avenue, a resource. So we have designated two folks who are outside of our power structure. They don't report to me. They're not even selected by me alone. They're selected by a group of folks called our nominating committee. And these folks have resources first of all, they're trained in how to receive complaints and hurts and deal with them. They can tell the difference between somebody being offended by a minor issue and something all the way to as serious as abuse has happened and a crime's been committed, and they know how to when to reach out to authorities. They know when the problem is with top leadership that maybe they need to call the superintendent. But all this is to say, this issue of church hurt and the opportunity to provide healing conversations is so important that we're implementing this new avenue of reporting, because I hope I'm not going to be the problem, but if anybody in authority is the source of pain or God forbid even abuse, I want that to be handled as quickly, as effectively as possible, because I'm concerned not just about like, okay, let's not upset the apple cart. I'm concerned that we actually provide an avenue for people to be heard who have been hurt.
Yeah, there's accountability there that exists without any sort of influence from the infrastructure, which I think is important. And there's no way to know what someone is carrying with them. It may not have anything to do with you or your church, but it's something that happened at their last church, an interaction they had with the last lead pastor. And it's too much for them to bring that again to a new lead pastor. So I think just trying to create a wide net of people across your entire organization that are open to hearing these, that know how to have healing conversations, and then also know when a conversation needs to be reported at a different level. I think that's just the best way to try and structure a system for accountability.
It's just healthy. It's healthy accountability, healthy communication, and care for the flock that we're entrusted with. And we know not every church is going to be open to these kind of conversations. You might be in a space where this isn't, you're listening and you're like, that would be nice, but it's not here. So we're aware that that's a factor for a lot of people.
Where can somebody go if they can't talk to somebody?
I think there are a couple options. I think a licensed therapist or counselor is always a great place to start. To find healing with somebody who has the credentials and the ability and the training to help you process through the hurt that you've been feeling. I think having good, healthy community around you, if you can't find it in your space, seeking out other people of faith around you who maybe there are different support groups around for different levels of things, experiences like that, but reaching out outside, just don't keep it silent. Because if you're in a place where you can't have an open, honest conversation in your faith community, that's a red flag. Yeah. That's a huge deal that you can't open up. That's a sign that there's unhealth there. And having been, as we're going to talk about coming through this, I think the more that we talk about things, the more conversations we have, the healthier things can be. And there's always room to grow in every church. I don't think any church is perfect, but if you can't have a conversation, that's a red flag.
What about for the person? Listen, it's so difficult that the impetus for saying something, it's so unfair that falls on the person who is already hurt, and now I have to do this hard thing. But why? Why is that important?
It's important because if we keep silent, that allows and gives room for abuse to keep happening. It perpetuates abuse when we're silent. But I know it's hard. I'm not saying it's a simple thing, just speak up and everything's going to be easy and better. It's a process, but as you give voice to what's going on, light gets shed on that. And that's when healing can start happening or action can be taken, because if you don't talk about it, nobody's going to know.
Yeah.
And that's how abuse is allowed to continue.
And so for the person, what you're make me think about is that for the person who's wondering, maybe I should just let this go, but it is a significant hurt. Maybe or even abuse. Maybe your pursuit of the conversation and your pursuit of healing is for the next person. Maybe something stops that shouldn't be perpetuated.
Because sometimes we don't want to stand up for ourselves, but we'll fight for other people.
Yes.
And so if you can keep in mind that you're saying something will stop this for the next person, it will give you that courage and extra strength to speak up about what's going on.
I think, I've been in the position of someone who's, like I said, I have avoidant tendencies. So I'm sitting there thinking, should I really bring this up? Or maybe maybe I'm the crazy one. Like maybe that's not what really happened.
Maybe you are.
Yeah, right? Maybe I am the crazy one. And so I think that even if you're not ready to go and start a conversation with somebody that's going to help bring about change, you can at least gather a couple close people that you know are healthy spiritually and emotionally and say, hey, this thing happened to me and I'm like, churning over it. How do you think I should proceed with this? And like that's been so helpful to me because they have a clarity that I don't in the current moment. And I trust them. And if I said, you know what, don't ever bring this up to anybody ever again. I'm not hurt, no one else is getting hurt, and I'm not comfortable talking about it anymore. Like that person would respect me and go, okay, I understand. And that if they were like, no, you're being hurt right now, I'm going to pioneer for you. Like that's the kind of person that I think you can talk to even before you start a more I guess I would say a more official way of getting a healing conversation going.
That's what God describes in Scripture a lot, is having that wise counsel. Because we might be the person that needs correction, but feel like we're, justified in being angry or upset. So having good, wise counsel is somebody who will hold you accountable and say, okay, actually, this is the perspective that I see. This might be your part. But they'll also be the people who, like you're talking about, Heather, who will say like, oh no, this is really a problem. So having that balance of other people is really important in our lives. That's why God designed us to need community, healthy community, is that having that other voice to speak into the situation.
Yeah. So, okay, the conversation has been primed. People are ready to talk. Let's say this is a leader talking with someone else. What should these conversations be like? Because we haven't been very clear as to what a healing conversation sounds like right now. But we've talked about how important they are. So what is it supposed to be like while it's happening?
I think if you've been hurt, the first thing you need is someone to sit across from you and listen for understanding. Unless you are willing to actually hear me, we all can tell the difference between somebody who's actually listening and somebody who's formulating their response, their defense, their argument. And so if I feel like I'm saying, hey, here's this thing that happened and I really was injured by this, and I can see their wheels turning and their concern is going to go right to minimizing. Their concern is going to go right to explaining and protecting the status quo. I'm checked out. I'm like, okay, this was the wrong decision. So listening for understanding, I think, is the first thing you're really needing the person across from you to display. And then it's possible that I walk around with my perspective. And so it's possible if I feel like I'm understood, then in that context, somebody could offer clarification. Somebody could, I could take the hurt that's like factual and I could add to it all of these assumptions I've made. And then I could, hear, I'm thinking about this is like that. And this person must have meant that. And maybe somebody across from me, not to minimize, but can help just clear up some assumptions, to help me or even help me draw more out of me to help me clarify what it is I'm trying to articulate.
Yeah. And I think when something has hurt you because you saw it done to someone else, that's probably the situation where that's most likely to happen. You know, you
Yes.
think of the game of telephone, and it's like you didn't know that dots were connected that weren't supposed to be connected. And so you come in to talk about something, you're like, I can't believe that this person said that or did that. And someone can go, oh, that's not what happened. And it's like, oh. And then you can, that gets to be taken care of, and you still get to address like the actual pain behind it all. It's not like, oh, well, then none of it is valid. It just is a clarification point for you to start moving forward.
I think leaders need to hear this. If someone comes to you with an issue, listen, I get up and all day, every day, I'm thinking about the health of New Life Ministries. And I'm thinking about how do we accomplish the mission? How do we tell more people about Jesus? And anything that seems to threaten that is scary to me. So when somebody comes and says, hey, this ugly thing happened, and I need to tell you about it, and it's part of what happened in your church. I'm like, and I need to listen for understanding. And I think not having prescribed expectations, not trying to fix, just understanding first, this person across from me needs to be heard, and I need to understand. Even if I disagree with their depiction of this or that, I need to get information and understand what this person is saying.
Yeah, because the truth is, when someone comes to you and tells you how something affected them, that is the truth. Like, their feelings are real, and they are valid. So making sure that person knows that, and that you know that's really the very first step to being able to have a healing conversation, because without that, it's not going to go anywhere.
I think 95% of the conversations are about getting heard. Because I heard a quote one time that said that feeling heard is as close to feeling loved for most people as they can get. They're almost indistinguishable for people. So if they feel heard, they feel loved. And God calls us to love first. And I think it's hard because we all come to conversations with wanting to defend. But if we can put down our defense and hear another person, we're really showing the love of Christ. And it takes intentionality, but it's definitely worth it, because that's a lot of times a big portion of what people need is to be heard.
And I think, like, from the leader's perspective, you may have opportunity to clarify, but don't make that your primary. First, listen, ask clarifying, hey, tell me more. Help me understand. Make those your catchphrases. Help me understand. What was that like for you?
And like you said, don't go in with an expectation. So, like, maybe you hear something that is like misinformation, but you have to determine, I'm not bringing that up in this conversation, because this doesn't have to be the only conversation. There can be more of these. Listen and just be there, be present, and continue on. Like, that doesn't have, it's not a one and done.
I've had folks come to me who literally misunderstood a word that somebody said, or they just looked at something and made an assumption, and they were wrong. Even in that case where, like, they're factually wrong, they need to be heard and understood of what they saw and experienced in order to feel loved, so that they will even be open to discussing, a clarification. But I think, moving on to, there can be results from the conversations.
Oh, yeah. It goes beyond someone feeling heard and seen and loved.
Because as a proactive person, that makes me feel like, so I'm just going to sit there and just hear and understand, and that's it. Maybe.
I mean, that legitimately might be what
I've done
people
that.
need. Yeah. But there's possibility for more than that in
Yeah.
God's plans for us.
Yeah, this makes me think all the way back to my very first sermon that I preached. It was the weirdest thing. I ended up preaching about biblical conflict resolution. And here's what happened. The pastor wouldn't refuse to give me an assignment. He saw that, I love Jesus and maybe, I would be called to preach. And so he said, hey, why don't you preach this summer while I'm on vacation? I said, great. What do you want me to preach about? He said, anything you want, just pray. And I was like, oh, darn, I wish you gave me a topic. So I just went to the New Testament and started reading Matthew. And I prayed through it as I read. I got all the way to Matthew chapter 18, and the Lord was like, right here, I want you to take Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 20, Jesus, prescription for conflict resolution that says, okay, if someone offends you, or if somebody sins against you, the obligation is for you to go and confront them first. And one-on-one. So if Pastor Marisa, she's so abrasive, if she just goes and bops me in the forehead and I don't go to somebody else, or metaphorically speaking, box me in the forehead. Like let's say she's rude, or somebody is mean to me, and I don't go like, hey, Heather, you know who really was mean to me? And then, because this is what people do, they'll go and they'll talk to 10 other people,
isn't that just
and not
called
the one
venting?
person. Yeah, tell it to Facebook, right? But we experience, as people who work with people, again, that 95% of issues can be handled between a one-on-one. Hey, listen, do you understand that, when you said that thing that felt really snappy to me, and that kind of like just really dinged me, and it, stung. Oh gosh, I didn't even have any idea that registered with you. I was just kidding around. I'm so sorry that happened. That happens often. Or, yeah, there really is something there. I've been holding anger towards you. Can we talk about it? There's chance for resolution when you actually go and confront. But then Jesus is so wise. He says, if that doesn't work, if you can't get to peace with that person through a personal confrontation, take somebody else or one other person. And this is biblical. It goes all the way back to God's prescription in the Old Testament for how to establish what's true. Take a couple trustworthy people, godly people, wise people, and sit down and say, hey, can we talk about this again with some other wise people in the room? And then finally, if it doesn't work, go to the church. And then there's a process as a step for after that, which involves separation. But even as we look at God's prescription for conflict resolution, we understand, and we see even in Scripture, that this is not a template for every single bad thing that happens. Marisa, you want to talk about that for a moment?
Well, like we've kind of talked about, there are situations where abuse has been committed, and that's a crime. There are extreme situations like that, and unfortunately, it happens in the church. When that happens, victims of abuse do not need to try to work it out with their abuser. Yeah. That's not ever something the church should ask or expect of a victim, and I don't think that generally we do, but just if you're a victim of abuse, know that if somebody's asking you to confront your abuser, that's not appropriate.
We've heard horror stories of this.
Yeah.
Because people are like, hey, the Bible says you've got to go talk to them first.
Go talk to them, Matthew 18.
Yeah.
But that's never, when you're a victim of abuse, it's not on you to be able to go and confront your abuser. It is important to speak to someone, though. Mm-hmm. And that might involve talking to a counselor, getting the authorities involved, depending on the situation and the type of abuse. But get help outside of where you would have to confront your abuser. That's not something that is the expectation.
I think even in a a clearly abusive situation is a great example. And I think even in less extreme cases, let's say my teenage daughter feels like there's just somebody being skeezy that's an adult, or just saying inappropriate things. I'm not going to tell my teenage daughter, listen, okay, Jesus says you just need to go and talk to this person. No. Like when there's a huge power differential and somebody's in a really vulnerable spot, they may need help. At the minimum, coaching for how to appropriately confront, but more likely advocacy.
Yeah. And I think that's as we have these healing conversations and as you are entrusted with someone's story, whether you're a leader, a small group leader, a member of the church, whoever it is that's listening, and you're entrusted with someone's story, listen with, I would always encourage everybody to pray before those conversations and in those conversations to be led by the Spirit to know and discern what actions should be taken because number one, if somebody's sharing their story with you, you're a trusted person to them. And that's a high responsibility. And I think knowing what that line is, sometimes it's not as cut and dry as, Joe's example of like his teenage daughter, but that scenario, but
the appropriate response to that, by the way, would be shock and awe.
Yes, but we can be good advocates for the people who are coming to us, and we can do that led by the Spirit because there are avenues to address things, but we can advocate for people and not expect them to be the one addressing whoever is making them uncomfortable. Especially when children and teenagers tell you they're uncomfortable with somebody, listen to that. I think in the church sometimes we think it's meant to be a safe space, but not everybody who comes is in a place where they can be trusted, and so that's something to be aware of and listen when somebody speaks up. Because when churches ask abuse victims to confront their abuser, they're heaping trauma on top of trauma, and that's how unintentionally even more damage can be done.
I think, we've talked a lot about trying to move towards closure, growth, but I wanted to bring up the word reconciliation because I know that is a biblical word, and I also know it's not always possible. Yeah. There's a lot of different constraints. A simple one is that, the person that harmed you has passed on, that they're literally not here anymore. But there's a lot of other situations, and can you guys kind of talk about that for me? And maybe what's the difference between resolution or closure and reconciliation? And if reconciliation's not possible, what does that mean? How do we move forward?
I think reconciliation requires both people to be in a healthy place, to have to take ownership for their part, to engage in that conversation at a level that's healthy. But unfortunately, that's not always the case.
Can I add one thing? Because that's 100% true. And I love how you just said that both of the folks involved, both parties have to be in a healthy place and willing to forgive, willing to work it out. And this is the important thing, the harm has to stop.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because
yeah.
How many times have you been like, we talked about this. You're doing the exact same harmful, hurtful thing that we processed through and went all through. We cried and we prayed and we forgave.
But you keep doing it, so I don't understand. Yeah, I think that's a huge factor is you're right. The harm has to be done. Like part of true repentance is changed behavior. Yeah. It's not saying you're sorry. Repentance isn't, I'm sorry, and then you keep doing the same thing. Repentance is a 180 turn away from whatever you were doing and back towards what God has called you to be and act.
Can we talk about Jesus for a moment?
Yeah, we're at church. I don't know. Is that okay?
Because this is as a pastor over the years, I've had so many Christians get hung up with pre-scripted ways that they think they must act towards people who hurt them. Because
it makes me honestly, it makes me angry that people get stuck in that place because of what they've been told.
And you've seen people harmed over and over again, and it keeps on happening because it's like, hey, nobody's ever told them, like, If somebody says they're sorry, but they keep on slamming your head in a car door, maybe back away. And Jesus set boundaries. Think about Jesus himself. And this is something this has become this has rocked people's world as I've seen them discover this, whether, they're reading the book Boundaries, or they're just looking at the life of our Savior, Jesus. Like, Jesus never sinned. He was never, out of the Father's will. And because Jesus, more than any other human who's ever lived, was clear about his identity, he was always in charge of himself. Jesus
He was
knew,
not cruel.
Yeah, he never cruel.
I think a lot of times people see boundaries as hurtful, and they don't want to be hurtful to someone who's been hurtful to them. Yeah. And it's not hurtful. It's actually healthy, and it's respecting yourself and the other person. And boundaries are made for better relationship. Yeah. When you set boundaries with somebody, it's because you care enough about them to work to a healthy place with them.
Jesus knew where he ended and someone else began. There were days when Jesus and his disciples worked so hard, they didn't have time to eat. But they gave that as a willing gift because they were in charge of themselves. And then there was a time when Jesus had healed the last person he would heal that day. He touched the last person and cured their sickness. And then he turned around and he said to the disciples, now we're going to go away where there's nobody to ask anything from us, and we're going to recharge with our Father. And he moved from scenario to scenario in his life with intentionality, completely in charge of himself. And so for the person whose boundaries have been violated because somebody has harmed them, it's hard for them to think that they get to have boundaries. But this is actually a thing you must do in order to steward yourself well, because you're responsible to God for how you care for yourself. And if you're not in charge of yourself, you actually can't willingly give to someone with a clear heart. So all of this is a kind of a whole other topic, but there is biblical basis for us pursuing reconciliation. And we have more tools than anybody else in the world. And when it can't be, we, having done everything in our power to do it, can sleep at night knowing that we can turn those folks over to God and
experience growth ourselves.
Yeah, right.
Well, isn't that just the message of Jesus Christ is hope? That's thank you for sharing all that, Joe. This intentionality that we've had here at New Life to have space for healing conversations was really kicked into gear last October. So that's October 2023, when we gave a message on church hurt. And we had people reach out to us to share the hurt that they experienced right here in our church. Yeah. New Life is, we're not going to ignore that church hurt happens here too. And we have to admit that and be upfront about that and abide by the process that we just spent the last half hour talking about.
This is the putting our money where our mouth is moment. I'm just getting a little emotional because we understand the concept that no church is perfect. Like Marisa said, as soon as I walk into a church, it's not perfect. That's true for any of us. And New Life certainly isn't perfect. But when people have been deeply wounded at our church, first thing when we had people reaching out and saying, hey, listen, I was hurt, and I was hurt there. The first thing Heather just reminded us of is like, hey, we're open to criticism. And we need to be able to receive criticism. We need to be able to just look and intently listen when people say things that are difficult to hear. And we could have just left it at that and let it fade and say, okay, well, those folks said some things, and but we had a decision to make. And so praying about,
Just like you said, no response.
yeah,
Is a
non-response is
response.
a response, right?
And the whole thing felt so delicate.
Yeah.
You know, like one wrong move could take someone's church hurt and just ignite it.
Yeah.
And like, you know,
Yeah. So
worse.
let me just say something, because I know there's going to be at least a few folks listening who are aware that essentially what we had a Facebook post about the church hurt message just get a lot of traction, and not in the way that we usually want it. People got on there and said, "Hey, I want to share my hurt," and that was really hard to process. And the decision point that we came to was this: how do we respond? So we decided we're going to reach out to every person that we can and offer a listening conversation for understanding. And so we had actually quite a few, and I mean, like, what is it, 20 folks who took us up on the offer.
Mm-hmm.
And we heard a lot of hard things. And I feel like I needed every bit of God's help just for the strength to do that. But I thought, if this was my daughter, who, I've got kids, one in Seattle and one in Charlotte. And if, one of my daughters started going to a church and something wonky happened and they got hurt, I would want somebody to sit across from them, not offering solutions as much as listening for understanding. And I know that some folks told me that was in and of itself, sitting down eyeball to eyeball and just saying, "Can you please tell me about your hurt?" Was in and of itself healing. For others, maybe they feel like it was kind of a mixed thing. It was some good in it, but wish there could have been more resolution. And long story short, I think it's spiritually important for us as a whole church. If I in my personal life know that I hurt somebody and I don't do something about that to repair it, to confess and repent, I'm on the hook for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a corporate body, we're on the hook for that. So I just want to encourage any pastors who are listening, any church leaders, that you're only responsible for what you're responsible for, but please be responsible for what you're responsible for. And if you are the leader of a small group, you're responsible for the dynamics within that small group, responding to the person who left upset because, somebody said something sideways to them and it wasn't appropriate. You have to do the work. It might be ugly and you might not know how to do it, but doing nothing is going to guarantee the hurt continues.
You're not going to do it right the first time.
Hello.
Guess what? We're all still messy people.
Yeah. But not doing it is not doing it. And it's really important to just start. And I think that was one thing that it was a humbling experience for me during this time to be, to have these conversations and to hear that I was a part of some people's hurt that I had no idea. And to just listen and be able to find resolution with some people, and also just to hear and be a listening presence for others who I might not have participated, but I was here at the church when it was happening. And just the whole process you won't do it perfectly. There's no perfect, but stumbling forward with God is still moving forward, and it's towards healing and for you and the other person. And I think just starting somewhere is important, having those conversations.
Yeah. And I wanted to loop back. You said that when we got the engagement on Facebook, it wasn't the kind of engagement that you're looking for.
Yeah, the algorithm really responded positively to showing everybody's hurt.
Yeah. Well, see, this is the thing, though, is that, imagine that you put something on Facebook and everyone tells you how much you've hurt them. Oh, yeah, that's extremely difficult to go through. But looking back, that is the engagement that I wanted. Like, I wanted people, that's what the message was about, to open up and to start the conversations. And although it was so hard, that we did start the conversations from that. And there was real, I got to witness someone that experienced healing. And like, I am so blessed by that person letting me in on that. And, it wasn't every conversation that led to reconciliation, but it was beautiful.
And just so listeners can understand, we reached out to dozens of people through different means. We sent, there was folks I knew on there and just sent them personal Facebook messages. There were other people who do we have an email for this person? How can we reach out? Do we have a phone number? Can we call them? The couple that we sent letters to because the hurt was so deep and relationships have been so distant. But we wanted to offer an alternative, and even, some of our board members being willing to, sit with folks and hear for understanding. But I had one lady say "Hey, I think just saying it out loud on Facebook was all I needed, and I think I'm good. But thanks for reaching out." And all the way to folks sitting in my office who I hadn't seen in years, and just telling me things, a couple of which I knew, some of which I didn't, and whenever possible, being able to say, "I am so sorry this happened to you." In certain instances, I am so sorry that I was a part of that for you. And it's not fun, but if it's the right thing to do, these people are precious to the Lord. And I think engaging, I just want to reiterate what you said. If you're a leader, you may not know how to go about this. Nobody does. You're not taught this. Just engage, pray, but do. Reach out, say, "Hey, can you help me understand?" That act, and then when it's possible, say, "I'm sorry."
And the whole, speaking to leaders, speaking to the people that need to be intentional about creating the space for these conversations, this experience grew our team. Our team came together and we wholeheartedly prayed over this and came up with plans and decided, we need to get these things as part of our structure, as part of our process. It inspired us to have today's episode so that other people could have ideas of how to approach these things, because it's something that's not super resourced out there. And to be part of a team that came together, and I got to watch individuals in our team grow and be stronger leaders after that. I'm like, you have to do this. You can't ignore it. You can't step back. You can't step down. You just have to try. And there is a bit of a bonding, you'll be able to grow in that sense too.
If it weren't for this painful discovery of how much we know that there was church hurt.
Yeah, it's going to happen again too.
If we hadn't engaged in this, if we just took the Facebook post down, it's like, oh, people didn't, get to complain, and we wouldn't have engaged in the process, and it would not have led to the designated reporters. Happening. So the fruit of us walking through this painful process and reaching out and listening to folks for understanding, the designated reporter idea actually came from a specific question one of the hurt people asked me. They said, "Joe, this is a business-minded person." And they looked at me and just plain as day said, "Hey, so let me ask you a question. If somebody has an issue, just like at your regular job, you've got an HR thing, and we have that for our employees and things. But let's say somebody gets hurt in this church. What's the process? What do they actually do? Who do they go to?" And of course, my mind was like, okay, well, they can come to me. They can come to the staff. They can come to the board. But I just said, that's a really good question. because I knew what they meant was not like, what do they do under ideal circumstances? Right. What they meant was, what if it's you?
Mm-hmm.
What if they don't feel like they can come to you? Because even if it's one of your staff, you're like, oh man, in the back of your head, you're going to be thinking, oh, this is going to be trouble. This is going to be a pain. And they're afraid you're just going to try to silence them. Or if it's a board member and, they're thinking like, okay, if this church hurt thing gets out, maybe that's going to affect our budget or whatever. It's going to harm the church. No, who is outside of that power structure? Who's a safe person, who is trained and empowered to actually seek resolution and advocate for the person who is hurt. And that's where we came up with our designated reporters. So I'm pleased that we're stepping into it.
We're going to continue stepping through it because it's it's a fluid process. Creating, your structure for how you handle church hurt will need to change when it needs to change, and you need to keep evaluating and reevaluating and be intentional. Like, this was, I think, a really great thing that happened here, to have the designated reporters, to train up leaders on how to have a healing conversation, what it should feel like, what it should sound like. But it's a process that's ongoing.
Can I just address a certain group of people that are maybe listening to this, as we kind of draw towards the close? If you are a newer Christian, or you just started going to church, or you were thinking about going to church, you're like, holy cow, do I even want to do this? Because they've got a whole, episode of they talking about all the hurt. Like, is this even worth it? Oh my goodness. Yes, Jesus is the fountain of life. He is the source of healing. And the reason we're talking about this is because this is the aberration that needs to be addressed. This is the problem that as Christians, we have all the resources for these, problems to be addressed and for healing to happen. And that's what we want. So if you're listening along and you're like, man, this sounds like, it's like every day I'm going to walk into the church and get poked in the eye. No, that's not the case.
But we want you to be prepared for if that happens or when that happens.
Or if it happens to a loved one.
If it happens to a loved one, that there is hope on the other side of it and a closer relationship with the people in the church if you're willing to work through it and depending on the situation. And we know what community and connection you can have in the church, and that's what we want to fight for and provide for people in the church.
And I know that the people I look up to the most, whose faith I want to emulate, I want to be like them in Jesus, I know they have suffered church hurt. They've experienced the Lord ministering to them, and they've come out the other side loving Jesus and loving his church.
Yeah. And it deepens our empathy for each other as we do that.
Well, I want to thank you both for coming in and having this conversation. Episode 1 was evangelism. Episode 2, church hurt. We are just jumping right in. So thank you for being part of this conversation and just really genuinely trying to help others have the tough conversations and teaching ourselves how to have those tough conversations. We can have healing conversations about hurt and everything in between. And, we don't want to leave you guys empty-handed. So we've prepared a couple of resources for you to take home and to help empower you and to speak up and listen in that.
I am so excited to share my resources. I'm gonna burst.
You were beaming. I'm like, what did I say?
Okay, so listen. I want to recommend to any Christian out there, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pastor Peter Scazzaro. He learned the hard way that you cannot be emotionally unhealthy and spiritually healthy. You cannot be emotionally immature and spiritually mature. So God created us as whole beings, and our health through Christ, emotional health is an essential component of that. So he ended up having so many people take advantage of the resource of emotionally healthy spirituality. He wrote The Emotionally Healthy Church and The Emotionally Healthy Leader. There's corresponding workbooks. I've been through
discipleship.
Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, all of it. I've been through hours and hours of these resources, and every single one of them, it's involved, but it has blessed me so much. And then also, there are some great Christian psychologists like Dr. Henry Cloud. Other than the Bible, the book Boundaries is the book I've given out most in my ministry, and because Christians are historically bad at it, and that's not biblical. So Boundaries for Leaders, and a book called Necessary Endings. And if the title of that catches you, grab it.
A resource that I wanted to share is actually a book that my small group worked through, and it's Good Boundaries and Goodbyes by Lisa TerKeurst. It's a really wonderful book. Lisa has a way of writing that's very personal. It feels like you're sitting right there with her, talking to her. It's a very approachable book. And she hits those same topics of how boundaries are from God and how goodbyes can be good byes. And she uses her own personal testimony a lot as well. So it's a very good read. I would recommend it for an individual or for a group setting.
And I'd love to recommend a book called Life's Healing Choices by John Baker. He's the founder of Celebrate Recovery, and it's just an amazing book.
He knows a thing or two.
Yeah. Celebrate Recovery talks about healing from any hurt, habit, or hang-up that you're dealing with, and that's all of us. So this book has been really helpful for a lot of people in just getting on the track of dealing with some of these relational issues that, we can be struggling with.
And then the last thing that I would want to point you guys to is actually the message that we referenced earlier that we gave about church hurt. And that would be part 4 of our message series called Scary Church. This is something we did in October of 2023. And everything that we talked about in that message, everything Joe preached, is a really wonderful foundation for understanding church hurt and how we as a church body should process it and work through it.
We've used the term church hurt exclusively during this podcast. In the message, I give a definition and the beginning of understanding about kind of the upper end of church hurt called spiritual abuse. And so that's defined in that message, and it's been helpful to a lot of folks.
And you can find that message, as well as all of our other ways to stay connected to us, linked in our description. And of course, you can always visit us on Sunday, live online at 9 a.m. and in person right here in Endicott at 9 and 10:30 a.m. And we hope to see you this Sunday and walk alongside you in your journey. And until then, thanks for listening to Off Sunday. We'll see you soon. Bye.